Welcome to the Sparked podcast, the show that will get you fired up about standards. On today's show, we have Danielle Bancroft, Chief Product Officer at Best Practice Software, Elizabeth Koff, Managing Director at Telstra Health, and Kay Hocking, Chief Product Officer at Alcidion. All of our guests today are responsible in one way or another for ensuring support and investment from industry and standards. By the end of today's episode, you'll know why we're at a tipping point in interoperability right now and what the benefits are of being involved in Sparked. Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone. Great to have you for this session of the podcast. I've got Elizabeth Koff, Danielle Bancroft, and Kay Hocking with me today, and we're going to talk about FHIR as it relates to industry on fire, no less. Welcome all. Elizabeth, I'll start with you. Interoperability seems like a never-ending journey in some respects, but it does seem like we're at a bit of a tipping point at the moment. What do you feel is different at this point in time?
Thanks, Brett, and delighted to be with you on this session today. I'm ever optimistic that we are at a tipping point with interoperability in the health system. And I must admit, I come from it from two different perspectives, both being on the provider side of healthcare and now also the provider side of digital solutions. And I think the experience of working on both sides of the equation, government and industry, has demonstrated that if we don't work collaboratively in partnerships, we will never solve some of the biggest wicked problems in healthcare delivery in Australia. Partnerships are integral to be able to shift the dial and transform the health sector. And those partnerships need to be with government, with academia, and with industry. And it's only with those partners coming together that I believe we can actually then start delivering better outcomes for the Australian population and beyond. Health does not want for digital solutions, and I think that's something that's interested me in moving from the provider side in healthcare delivery to the industry side, that there are so many digital solutions out there. And part of the challenge is integrating them in a coherent way, and then the information that they can deliver being able to be leveraged and used to deliver better patient care. And the frustration we've all experienced, both as receivers of healthcare, is the frustration that why don't some people know what's happened to me, know what my results are, know what treatment I got at the last visit to the hospital? Because we've established silos across the whole of the system that don't actually then enable that critical information to be communicated. And in my mind, the information will not only deliver better patient and clinician experience, but better health outcomes. And that's why we should be here. From the industry perspective, having this Sparked initiative really provides some confidence and direction of where we need to go as a system. Because I think the fragmentation in digital solutions and the healthcare sector means everybody's had a rather myopic focus on how they can deliver their solution and their outcome. However, by coming together in this collaborative accelerator, which I even like the terminology of accelerator, it really sends a strong message that we are all custodians of our future in delivering the healthcare interoperability solution. And if we work collaboratively, the results can be extraordinary. So the tipping point is here, and I'm waiting for it to tip.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Danielle, you've been on this interoperability journey for some time, but you've also seen some really concrete examples of it working come through. E-prescribing is one example that you've witnessed and been part of, and we feel it in terms of the benefits. I certainly feel it in terms of the convenience and smoothness of prescribing. Tell us a little bit about your feel as to where we are right now on this journey.
To Elizabeth's point, I too feel like we're the closest we've ever been to actually progressing some of these interoperability pieces. We have a very clear picture of an industry where we want to end up, but we're actually approaching it incrementally and targeting areas that are high priority use cases first. So e-prescribing is a great example where we took a need, albeit driven by the times, as we all know, but it really accelerated during that time to deliver a known quantity. We understood the use case. We had an output of what it was we were trying to achieve. And we did that incrementally. So starting with tokens first and then building on that process through to what we now have, which is the active script list, which has some huge potential, particularly for people with chronic disease and complex medications. They can now easily manage that, walk into the pharmacy anywhere once they've signed up and get their prescriptions or even delivered if they need to. So the flexibility of what we can offer as we provide interoperability is really key. But those benefits that come out of it, it's not just about better use cases and workflow. Elizabeth touched on a couple of them as well. It comes down to a known quantity and roadmaps. We often build and accelerate. It's easy to innovate, but if you have some assurance, you can actually make sure you can build that value in as you're delivering customer value at the same time. There's a much better ability to cater for a broader context of the landscape, and that provides better innovation. So the example I give is we have over 200 partners in our partnership network. That's a lot of cost and investment to try and connect to bespoke systems and offer different integrations, but we can't be everything to everybody. And what FHIR does is it allows us to provide a known standardized format for connecting to our system that can be reused. So you're actually able to reuse that for everyone else.
Fantastic. Thanks, Danielle. And welcome, Kay. So it seems like a never-ending journey, this interoperability thing, but we do seem to be at a tipping point with it. What's your reflection on that tipping point that we might be at now with interoperability?
Thanks, Brett. I think we've arrived at that point of realisation. And as Danielle was just saying, with 200 partners, you can't just be all things to all people. We need to all align on standards that we can support and work forward with. And that's going to be what makes us successful. As a sector, we're not big enough to support this standard versus that standard, etc. And it seems like common sense, but it's actually taken us quite a while to get there from that side of things. From our perspective as Alcidion, we decided on FHIR as being our basis for our platform when we started to redesign it in 2016. So obviously we're very happy that everybody else is sort of joining on that method at the moment as well too. It will help to allow us all to focus on the one direction, minimise the need for rework, for translation, for transformation, to agree on a standard. We'll be able to learn from each other and move forward rather than sideways to a certain extent because we're having to rework the interoperability that we know needs to happen. As Elizabeth said, patients should have that expectation in terms of the information that they've shared as part of their health journey, that it is available to other organisations as they move through the care that they're receiving. I reflect back to when I was working at Alfred Health and we were getting our first integration engine, and it was quite novel at the time to be doing that. And our CFO had to put forward the sort of approval for the business case, and because he was putting this to non-technical people, the way he created the analogy was as if you're speaking in Italian, this person's speaking in French, and you expect it to be able to understand each other. And we still do so much of that in its plainest sense. And that's where I think adopting this standard, all pushing forward together, is the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's where the accelerator is going to help us to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Elizabeth, you mentioned Sparked as the accelerator. Why do you think the approach that Sparked is taking is getting such support and investment from industry?
Look, I think a couple of attributes. Number one, the participatory approach. But there's nothing worse than being handed down edicts from high that you will comply, non-negotiable, and understand how they work. And I think the involvement and contribution, and as I said, government, academia and industry coming together in the best position to collectively understand how to move forward. The exchange of ideas, the learning, the mentorship, the expertise that is generated in the Sparked program are all value adds in my mind to getting the solution right. We're naive if we think that we can digitally transform when we have such an ad hoc landscape of digital solutions across the ecosystem, and sparked actually bringing people together, framing how we will move forward and giving confidence in direction. And whilst everybody involved in Sparked wants better outcomes and better clinical experience, the reality from the industry perspective, there needs to be investment and confidence that where future investment is made will be able to deliver the outcomes that have those expectations. So it's setting the guardrails for digital providers going forward. And I think that gives a lot more confidence for the future investment in digital solutions to transform the health system if we know where we're going.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Danielle, is that your reflection that once you get the techies, policymakers, researchers and industry in the room, that you're on the right track in terms of those conversations so that everyone understands the needs and perspectives in order to enable this?
That is definitely part of the change management journey, and it's a core piece. I've always been a big believer that technology is just an enabler. It's not the solution. You do need to have a number of pieces in place that are parallel to ensure the actual outcomes are what we want them to be. So having everyone in the room and understanding the journey, if you have buy-in, you definitely get better outcomes. That's 100% whenever you're trying to build a project. I think the flip side of that, though, is really ensuring that the policy and incentives go with it. And that's not necessarily to vendors. The example I like to give from my own personal experience, when we look at primary care, it's not that the technology is the rate limiter to connecting primary care to hospitals. That's never been the issue. We've had plenty of discussions along the way. I always like to break it down as when you go into a hospital and you talk to them about where they would like to invest their cash, and you say, would you like to buy a FHIR server or buy 200 beds? They're going to actually buy 200 beds hand down every day, because what they're looking at is right now they're being responsive to the issues that are in front of them. And that is, I've got a bed shortage, or I'm overwhelmed in the hospital, I need more beds. And it's really hard to have an explanation of that's a short-term solution. But if we look at the longer term and you invest in that FHIR server today, what you're actually getting is better transfer of data, and you're getting real-time data that then's available out at the GP clinic in real time that allows them to see on discharge exactly what meds they're on, exactly what the issues were, what's been altered or changed, and allows them to provide better continuity of care to that patient. And in most cases, prevent readmission, which means then you're not seeing the beds that you need to have. So I think that's the conversation that has to change as well in line with that. And it's starting to see that. So I do think there's a couple of other pieces that we need to work on in line with this, but it's definitely the groundwork to helping that groundswell to change.
I'm sure if you asked, do you want a real-time prescription monitoring system that saves dozens of lives year on year on year across Australia, then it's framed in a slightly different context, isn't it?
100%, but that's another really great example of one that took a while to get that realization, right? And again, it took one jurisdiction to make the bold move of investing in it, to see that value, for others to then go, oh, okay, actually, I see where that benefit is.
And now it's time for a fun fact from Kate.
We've had 67 tech design group meetings to date, and this amounts to a whopping 14,600 expert hours in total.
And Kate, how do you think the accelerator programs like Sparked can help deliver the healthcare that consumers really expect now?
One of the things is describing it in the language that it's talked about is a community, and it's creating that forum, that environment where people can share the benefit of their experience. There are people that have been working with FHIR for a long time. There are people that are new to that area as well too. And I think that opportunity to share experience, learnings, determine what is the best approach to go forward in that area as well too, as a collective, as opposed to everybody having to hoe their own road, so to speak, which can be overwhelming when you've got other deliverables as well too. It also means that we can prioritise things based on the best outcome for the broadest possible advantage to the sector as a whole, rather than, we need to do this thing which may not have as much benefit for everybody else, but working together, we can actually look at that broader priority with, as Elizabeth was saying, all the different aspects of the sector working together. It gives us more opportunity to arrive at, well, what is going to deliver the best outcomes overall, rather than one particular area of focus. That opportunity to, yes, share lessons learned, share the aspects of change management that were necessary to happen, how that's all worked. It's got to expedite the sort of adoption of such standards and therefore the better delivery that will be available from there as well too.
Thank you. Elizabeth, when you think about Sparked and similar accelerator programs, do you get a sense that the momentum that they're trying to build and the sense of forward progress that they're pushing allows all of industry to see that they need to get on the journey?
Without a doubt. I think nobody wants FOMO, number one. I go to the heart of the issue that we're all motivated by better health outcomes. It's challenging, and sometimes we're competitors, sometimes we're partners, sometimes we have different relationships. However, I don't think there's anyone in the industry that doesn't see the value in progressing down this path with what can be achieved. In some ways too, it makes it so much easier for industry to have that clarity of where the direction is going. I often despair when I look at the digital transformation of the healthcare sector, because when you look at other industries, we're definitely at the bottom quartile. And people from the outside look in and say, what has happened to health that digital transformation is so challenging? You know, you've got banks and telcos right at the front of the pack, where it was a business imperative for them to undertake digital transformation. And health is languishing, as I said, at the bottom quartile. And in my mind too, that's a function both of industry's fragmentation, but also government clarity on the direction and the contribution that research can make. So I'm really confident now that if we get the alignment of the stars, so to speak, that we will be able to make a significant step forward in the digital transformation, and it's in everybody's interest to do so.
Terrific. And maybe there's just that tiny bit of medical conservatism that us medical practitioners might bring to the table as well. But hopefully our FOMO of financial services can be a bit of a driver as well. Danielle, you gave a little bit of a hint around some of the challenges with real-time prescription monitoring. Tell us about some of the broader challenges you've experienced in implementing an accelerator from an industry perspective.
I think the hardest thing to really sort of get over in the first instance is getting people, kind of two things. The first is one, getting people to understand what the value is. The reality is you're always going to have, from a commercial business perspective, well, what's in it for me? Why am I joining a community and sharing? What do I get out of that as a value? So it's really taking them on the journey of what has been the commercial perspective for decades, which is I own the data, I own the system. If I own the customer, then I'm all good. But the reality is that the more we open up and connect to each other and start to share some of that logic and agree to some standards for connection, we actually all benefit, because the patient's the one that benefits. It actually makes things cheaper. We can go faster. Delivery to market is more known. As I said, the roadmaps become clearer, and you actually have assurance that what you're investing in makes sense, but it's also reusable. You don't have to rebuild everything from scratch. So you can start to move a lot quicker for your customer needs. The second challenge, outside of having that perspective of what are we getting out of it, is really picking and targeting key functionality or pieces of work that can be implemented together quickly to show benefit. If you pull together a community and it takes forever to actually see any benefit or get outcomes, then people kind of give up hope or drop out pretty quickly. And that's what I really like about Sparked, was it took an approach of not everyone is invested in the same thing. Yes, we have e-requesting is in desperate need of a makeover and needs to really improve, but there's whole parts of the industry that aren't involved in referrals or requesting. So how can we create a bundle of streams that actually meet the broader industry's needs to show value for everyone? And I think that's been done really well in this accelerator of picking, requesting, the patient summary, and the core functionality underlying, so it sort of targets everyone. That's really sort of broken through some of those niche problems you see initially with bringing people on that journey.
Terrific insights. Kay or Elizabeth, anything you want to add in terms of your perspectives on challenges in accelerators?
No, I think it's really just providing that opportunity to effectively work together. I think, as we've just mentioned, that essentially we are in a bit of a competitive environment. So it allows us to meet together in this sort of area where we can remove some of those barriers. We can work together for the common good and actually advance things to the betterment of everybody, rather than just be working in silos where it might make things better from you. I guess I'll liken it to an example where we're working in the UK at the moment and had to create a discharge summary standard that was using FHIR bundles. There is no primary care system in the UK that can accept FHIR bundles, but we had to do a whole lot of work to do this. We're happy to support that, but is it really going to advance the sector in any way by making that happen? So I think the model that we're now adopting here, in everybody together on the journey at the same time, is going to be so much more effective than really imposing standards without giving people the opportunity to achieve those standards as well too.
Thanks, Kay. It certainly sounds like the win-win here is that all of you are at the leading edge and collectively, and so you can actually take solace in the fact that you're not being left behind. Danielle, talk us through some of the benefits for industry of adopting standards. I know you've mentioned a few examples there, but what's in it for industry in the broader sense?
I think the reality is that traditionally Australia has been very reactive medicine. We tend to respond to the latest need or burning system at the time. We're now moving towards preventative health, and that really changes the way that health systems or user experience changes and how our technical systems need to meet those needs. The reality is connecting actually provides us with a better ability to provide bulk data, particularly for things like population health at the federal level, where we really see the benefits for adopting those standards. And it's not just one, it's the right standard for the right time. But those benefits start to be more broad in terms of not just, as I said before, working faster, having assurance in your roadmap, but it's being able to actually innovate faster, start to meet new issues or create new solutions that haven't existed in the past for problems that we've never been able to actually target. When you look at proactive or preventative health, you're starting to build out systems and looking at trends where we can actually start building technology ahead of the problem rather than trying to address a chronic disease or issue that's out of control. So a really classic example would be something like COVID. If we had some of those preventative health statistics in place and the data metrics to monitor, you could have actually had modeling to predict that before it became a really big outbreak. So there are ways that we can actually respond quicker in the future. And I think they're huge benefits from a health system and from industry, because you're allowed to focus on being able to actually create those systems ahead rather than trying to respond in the moment.
Thanks, Danielle. And Elizabeth, any concrete examples that come to mind for you? Presumably, there's a big piece around the trust and rapport that the patient has in terms of their reflections on industry enabling for their day-to-day life in the health system.
Danielle made some very opposite points on what the potential is of the interoperability, and it's far more than just the exchange of data and information. I think going forward, definitely you can't attend anything that's not discussing AI at the moment. And a fundamental step that I think we've seemed to have not paid as much attention to, that to have good AI, we need good data and information across the whole of the system. And whilst it's fragmented, unable to be exchanged, unable to be utilised in predictive capacities, etc., we're never going to realise the benefit of what is there. So I think it's more than a value add to have the interoperability at the heart of what we're doing. It is the foundational element of how we can move forward more broadly. Consumers or patients, and I always grapple with that because there seems to be a bit of a difference as to interpretation, but I like to think when you're receiving healthcare, you are a patient. I think the extraordinary opportunity that is open to us for the future with that interoperability and the sensible use of data in a trusted environment will be critical to taking it forward. When I reflect on what's happened just in social media circles, so many people gave their data and information unwittingly in it and was monetised most inappropriately. I think we need to ensure that we can gain the confidence of the community that the data and information will be used appropriately for interpreting health outcomes and being more predictive for the future of how their healthcare will be managed, both in terms of individuals, but also importantly for populations. Because if we're going to keep our health service at the forefront of its world class, we need to be able to utilise the data and information accordingly.
You bet. Thank you. Kay, any examples that come to mind from your perspective?
Perhaps the largest benefit I can see is the speed to delivery in terms of if we're all working based on the same standards, the ability for us to deliver in a timely fashion is just increased so significantly, which is going to ensure that we can deliver value. One of the recent examples I can call to was the International Patient Summary, which, because it's a FHIR basis, readily we could do that quickly. If everything was on the same standard, well, then it would apply across the board as well too. Whereas when we're working across different standards or different mechanisms, or we've got different expectations of outputs, we've got to work in multiple different ways, which again takes time, effort, and just means that we can't be as efficient and effective as we might be.
The Spark podcast is brought to you by the Australian Federal Department of Health and Aged Care, CSIRO's Australian eHealth Research Centre, HL7 Australia, and the Australian Digital Health Agency. You can join the community by heading to sparked.csiro.au. And don't forget to join us on LinkedIn at SparkedAU. This show is hosted by me, Brett Sutton, Director of Health and Biosecurity at CSIRO, and produced by Edge Studios' Janine Hamer and Lucy Ratz, and CSIRO's Dr. Naomi Stecklenburg. Sound by Hayley Dell.